Number 707. 707. Invitation song now would be number 29. To Christ be loyal and be true, His banner be unfurled, and borne along till is secure the comfort of the world. To Christ the Lord be true, for He will go with you and help you all your conflicts through. To Christ the Lord be true. To Christ be loyal and be true. He needs brave volunteers to stand against the powers of sin who gnaw like crowns or fears. To Christ the Lord be true, for He will go with you and help you all your conflicts through. To Christ the Lord be true. To Christ be loyal and be true. His noble service prove. Your faith and your fidelity, the fervor of your love. To Christ the Lord be true, for He will go with you and help you all your conflicts through. To Christ the Lord be true. To Christ be loyal and be true, and He will be your friend, defending and protecting you to life's triumphant end. To Christ the Lord be true, for He will go with you and help you all your conflicts through. To Christ the Lord be true.
Is that your everything? You want this? I always wanted to punch that thing, just see what happened. If it can. Well, I cut what I wanted to say to you down tonight. And what I'm hoping for is I can get through it without getting into a coffee mess. And I've been struggling the last 2 or 3 days, like a lot of you have, I'm sure. And we'll see how it goes. A couple things that I wanted to mention to you before I get into our lesson tonight, which I called endurance. And that was, I had read a book that was written by Nelson Mandela, who fought for liberty in South Africa for many years. He was in prison there for many years. He wrote a book called Long Walk to Freedom in 1994. Here's what he said. No one is born hating another person because of that person's color of skin, or that person's background, or that person's religion. People have to learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, he said, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. I read that and thought, that's That's a good, strong thought. One other thing I wanted to visit with you about is civility. Civility. Being civil. Civility in discourse. I'm telling you, from my perspective, it's almost a lost attribute. Somewhere along that way, our culture abandons civility, and today they're derided and they're ridiculed for who they are, what they believe. People have gotten bitter and angry, not just bitter and angry with those who don't agree with them. They get bitter and angry with those that aren't as bitter and angry as they are. You know what I'm talking about. Now think about that. Look up the word in your dictionary or Google it, and you'll find civility is defined as politeness and courtesy in your behavior or your speech. Civility in discourse requires an immense amount of humility. And you'll find civility is not only the acknowledgement that there is another perspective, but also that we could be wrong. But it goes further than that. Humility mandates that we view our friends on the other side as our moral and intellectual equal. In Paul's letter to the church in Ephesus, you'll find it in Ephesians, the 4th chapter, and I believe it's verses 1 through 6. Paul sought to quell a political conflict that was raging among the citizenry. In his plea for civility in discourse, this is what he wrote. I urge you to live a life worthy of the vocation wherewith you are called. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, and I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. For more than 20 years, Robert Frost, who wrote that poem that you just heard, which sold millions of copies in the U.S. and 22 other nations. For more than 20 years, Robert Frost was a failure. He was considered a failure by friends, neighbors, publishers. It was a lonely, frustrating struggle for recognition and publication, which never seemed willing to come his way. He often said that during this time of struggle, he was the one of the few people who actually knew that he was a poet. The world has since mourned his passing. And today, he towers as one of America's greatest writers of verse. His poems have been published, as I mentioned to you, in 22 different languages. The American edition of his poems sold millions, almost right off the bat. He was a 4-time winner of the coveted Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. And he had more honorary degrees than any other man of letters. He was in constant demand to come and to read his writings. Those who teach know that there's nothing like a person who writes a poem or writes anything that can make it sound like it should if it's not the author. The author knows. Robert Frost was 39 years old before he was able to sell his first volume of poetry to any publisher. He had been writing for more than 20 years before he was accepted to be published. His writings for those long years just met with an endless stream of rejections. Yet, he kept on writing. He kept on submitting his work. Finally, his perseverance paid off. He was published. He became a poet. Today we can say that the world is certainly a bit wiser and richer for the writings of Robert Frost. Robert Frost is a prime example of endurance. And in a moment, we're going to talk about religious perseverance. But an eminent psychiatrist by the name of Dr. George Crane recently listed various ingredients that are necessary for greatness. Among those qualities that he noted are some that you would expect to find: talent, responsibility. Then, surprisingly, he said that physical stamina is also necessary. He said that many men do not reach the apex of their life and their life's endeavors until quite late in life. And therefore, endurance is necessary. He cited Winston Churchill as a prime example. He could have cited Robert Frost. But Winston Churchill, I hope you've read about him. He was a British statesman who served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. United Kingdom would be England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, Northern Ireland. He did that from 1940 through 1945. What is the significance of that, of those years? World War II. Now, it was during World War II that he became the leader almost of the free world. He was also an orator and an author. He was married, had 5 children. He died in 1965. He served a second term from 1951 through 1955. Boy, I hope this works. Well, he served most of his second term. He couldn't quite finish it out physically. He rallied the British people during World War II, led his country from the brink of defeat to victory. Coming up through the ranks of politicians, he won a seat in the House of Commons, from which the Prime Minister is chosen. Churchill languished there until he reached his dream of being named PM, Prime Minister. That was when he had just reached that young age of 65. His second term as Prime Minister started with him in his late 70s. In World War II, he joined with a man that I know you've heard before, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They shaped the Allied strategy for World War II together. Actually, before the war, he alerted the world of Adolf Hitler's belief that Germans were the superior race of people and should rule the known world. Now, the way Hitler saw to do it was through military might. Few heeded Churchill's warning, or heeded it at the time also. Churchill gained prominence through his oratory ability. Oh, he was a talker. He's good, very persuasive. The average educated man at that time in history had a vocabulary of 5,000 to 7,000 words. Not bad. Churchill, at that time, had a vocabulary of 60,000 plus words. I didn't even know there's that many words in English language. There you go. As a late point in life, Churchill became known as the greatest prime minister of all time in Britain. He was much loved, much acclaimed. It just took him a while. It took endurance. What is true in the physical realm of life is also true in the spiritual part of living. If we are to reach the ultimate in what God wants us to be, there must be spiritual endurance. This quality in the Bible is called long-suffering, as well as patience. The Apostle Paul even lists long-suffering as a fruit of the Spirit. In this struggle for endurance, to fight the good fight, to keep the faith. In this struggle, it's the little things sometimes, more times than not, that drive us to despair. You can sit on a big mountain, but not on a tack. It's the little things. To reach our spiritual goal in life will take endurance. But, as the Bible tells us, it is worth the struggle. A writer, an editor, an author herself, Eleanor Doan, you may have heard of or seen her work. Bible study picture book. Anyway, the battle against evil is difficult, she said, not so much because of the action that's required, but because of the endurance that's necessary to achieve your victory. I like what Mark said about it in chapter 13 and verse 13. But he that shall endure until the end, the same shall be saved. Simple and to the point. If you can endure, the prize is there. And oh, how sweet it will be. I thank you tonight for bearing with me while I tried to get through this thing. I thought about calling and saying that I couldn't do it. But that would have been doing it late. And that's not what people do. I endured. I'll say that. What a struggle. Anyway, let me just say that the church is here for you. And if for some reason, and maybe a lot of times people think about, say, what we call coming forward. They may think about that for days, maybe even longer. And then finally, what does the guy say? They screw their courage to the sticking place and they hit that aisle, and then it becomes easier with each step that is taken. Perhaps you've done that, but you have the opportunity tonight to come forward, particularly if you're not a Christian. Really. Or you may be a child of God that has not made some correct decisions lately, and you'd like to get right with your God. If any of that applies to you, we'd invite you to come down. Come down that aisle as we stand and sing.
Oh, to Jesus I surrender all, to Him I freely give. I will ever love and trust Him, in His presence daily live. I surrender all. I surrender all to Thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all to Jesus. I surrender, humbly at His feet I bow. Worldly pleasures all forsaken, take me, Jesus,